Hello everyone, welcome back to my little studio. I have this in my hand because I've recently been going out and painting outside as much as I can in the autumn colors. Inside is everything I use when I go out in plein air for quick sessions. I have a separate setup that I use when I want to go out and paint for maybe 1 to 3 hours, which includes a pochade box and a tripod and a lot more gear. But having something portable, this is actually in backpack mode right now, makes quicker sessions much easier. And I have shared many videos about my plein air supplies in the past, including this setup. So I'll put some links to those in the description. But the whole reason I'm getting this out today is because of this. I want to show you the difference between these two palettes. We're going to be talking about the benefits of using liquid gouache in a palette like this, all the colors in there, versus a dried gouache palette, which I have been using almost exclusively for my plein air for a few years, two years at least. Dried gouache meaning the gouache is poured into these little pans and it dries in between the sessions. So when I want to go out and use it, I just have to spray it, let it soften up a little bit. And overall, the experience is a little bit more like watercolor. However, I do use professional gouache, which is pretty opaque. The reason I absolutely love my dried gouache palette is because it's so fuss-free and mess-free. Okay, the palette itself is really messy. I have many videos about dried gouache palettes, how to set them up, all of that stuff. I'll put those in the description as well. We're not going to go into that today, because today is all about liquid gouache. Probably seen me use it in the past in a palette similar to this, where the palette comes out of the water dish and the lid opens up. The lid is the mixing space, and then the silicone opens up and you put the gouache in there. This one's very old and very stained, but I have like 3 of these. And in the past, I have also used this kind, which has a silicone lid as well, but you need a separate mixing tray for it. Now, the whole reason I stopped using these a while ago was, first of all, they require a little more maintenance to keep mold-free, to keep clean. They can get a little bit messier. And I specifically made the horrible mistake of dropping mine face down full of paint in sand. Twice. And that's devastating because you cannot get sand out of the wet paint. So I tried painting it with them for a while, even after that, but I just couldn't. It was too grainy and awful. So I had to dump all the paint out. It was such a waste, and that just crushed me. So I gave up on them for a while. Of course, it was my fault. I left my setup unattended in a very windy day and it just tipped over and everything fell into the sand. One thing I do love about the wet gouache palettes like these is that they can hold way more colors, and I'm able to use fresh wet gouache outside and inside. Just put this in my backpack or keep it in the studio. And I'm able to switch between all the colors really quickly without the need to have a ton of tubes all over my desk or to bring all the tubes with me when I go outside. It is just so convenient to have something like this. So if I'm in the mood to use thick, really opaque, wet, juicy gouache, this is what I would reach for. Like I said, I can get opaque gouache out of my dried gouache palette as well, but it's not the same, and I can't get the full opacity. I can get close with some of the colors, but the full opacity with really thick brush strokes is really only possible with fresh liquid gouache. So without further ado, I am going to show you how I set them up, talk about some tips along the way, and of course, let me know if you come up with any other questions I haven't answered in the comments. I've been painting with gouache for several years now, and I think I've probably tried every possible setup. I've used liquid gouache straight out of the tube on mixing trays, on different types of palettes. I've used it in these airtight palette boxes, and I've also used it as dried gouache palettes outside. What's better? That all depends on you and your needs and your space and so many different factors. So I'll at least give you my insights and some things that I've learned and tried. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a little bit of a better idea of where to start. And of course, please leave your advice in the comments for others because I know a lot of beginners read the comments as well. I've lived in some very tiny places over the years, and sometimes I don't have the desk space to keep all of my tubes out that I want to paint with, especially when I'm going through an experimental phase where I'm trying a lot of different palettes, a lot of different combinations of colors. So for instance, sometimes I'll sit down and do a painting with one combination of colors, and then I'll do the same painting with a different combination of colors. And so I need all my tubes in front of me. Or maybe even more importantly, when I'm doing my color mixing studies, I'm very often quickly switching between different reds or different yellows or different blues to learn about mixing. And that is where these palettes really shine. Having all the colors out on the table in front of me not only is visually inspiring and encouraging me to paint all the time, but it is very convenient. A quick little break to let you know that if you're interested in learning how to paint with gouache, as in full-length, real-time gouache tutorials, I share those over on my Patreon every single month. This month we are doing misty autumn sheep in a field. I don't know how to describe it. Scotland, sheep, misty fields, autumn, you get the idea. But each month we have a different theme and I go in depth into how I paint it from start to finish, and everyone can paint along with me live as well as watch the replay. There are dozens of tutorials over there. As soon as you sign up, you get access to them. So go have fun exploring that if you want to learn with me. I do also have some watercolor tutorials over there, but I've definitely been focusing on gouache more recently. Okay, back to the video. There are some cons to this type of palette. The most notable one, I would say, is that it is prone to mold because it's liquid gouache, and where there is water, there is life. So if you leave it shut for too long, or maybe keep it in a very humid environment and you're using dirty water, it can potentially grow mold. There are some ways to combat this, like putting in a little bit of clove bud oil or all sorts of different options out there, but I have a separate video about cleaning and preventing mold and all of that kind of stuff, so I'll put a link to that in the description for you. The other con that I see quite often is that it can get real messy when I'm doing color mixing especially. So if I dip my brush into the yellow and then quickly dip it into the blue and then back into the yellow, I've contaminated two colors. And that just keeps getting worse and worse the longer you paint with it. So sometimes it doesn't take long for each color to look a little muddy. So in order to avoid that, I will sometimes scoop colors onto a mixing tray nearby and then mix from those piles. Or I will be very, very diligent about dipping my brush in the color and then cleaning it a little bit, or at least wiping the excess paint off on a paper towel before dipping it in the second color. Sometimes if you leave the palette alone for a while and then open it again, you'll notice that the binder and pigments are slightly separating, and that really depends on the brand as well as the different colors. Some colors are just more prone to that, and that's completely fine. It's actually so much easier to deal with in a palette like this than in the tube, because all you have to do is mix it with a palette knife or a toothpick or whatever. Whereas if you find that happening from a tube, you have to try to stick a toothpick into it and not make a huge mess, which is really challenging. So here you see me using it in the way I just described, where I am scooping the colors I want to use onto a mixing tray. And this just happens to be my Stay Wet palette. I tend to do this more in the first couple weeks after setting the palette up because it's still so fresh and clean and perfect, and I just don't want to mess it up. But as time goes on, I will definitely start mixing and pulling the paint directly from the palette as I paint. I especially like to use fresh gouache when I'm painting on toned paper or any kind of darker color besides white paper. as the gouache is fully opaque and able to stand on top of the paper. So I mentioned earlier that one of the benefits of this palette is that because it's so compact, it sits on my desk at all times, and I'm always looking at the beautiful array of colors, and that alone inspires me to paint sometimes. Sometimes I'll walk into my office trying to find something or just not even planning to paint. I'll look at the palette and get really excited about all the colors, and I'm like, ooh, I'll just do like a 20-minute painting session. I find it so inspiring to see the array of colors right in front of me without all the clutter that tends to happen when I have my tubes out on the desk. And obviously, this is super personal. Everyone is going to be different. Maybe you like having all your tubes out and that inspires you. But I just find that when I use these palettes, I end up painting so much more often. And if I combine that with the strategy I shared previously about cutting up my little reference photos and having them in a pile ready to go at all times, I am painting so much more. So some of you are very observant and you're probably sitting there thinking, Sarah, you already said that you don't need to have a palette of 36 or whatever colors out. That's too many colors. And yeah, you're right. I don't need that many colors. But guess what? I'm a little silly and I didn't even think about searching for an airtight palette like this with less wells. I just used the one that I already owned and never even thought that it was a thing. I have to give a shout out to Eric Rhodes, who mentioned this palette, I think during the Gouache Live event, or maybe Art School Live, but he mentioned it. I went online and searched for it and instantly bought it because just look at the size difference between these wells. And when I'm using bigger brushes, this can get really annoying. I can just barely fit it kind of diagonally. And I have much bigger brushes than this that I like to use. So this is a game changer. And lastly, as a reminder, there's always a link in the description to my favorite supplies, and I will put a specific link to all of the palettes that I'm talking about in this video. So after I bought this new palette with 12 wells, I decided to scoop out whatever colors I was using the most, whatever colors are inspiring me the most this season, which is autumn, scoop those into the new palette, top it up a little bit, and then put the remaining colors into one of my smaller palettes that I might take outside more often. And the reasons were twofold. One, of course, I wanted to try the new 12 well palette because I'm able to use my bigger brushes with it. And two, I want to be painting outside with one of these, and the little one just happens to be a little more convenient and fit on my pochade box. Actually, there's a third reason. Since I scooped my favorite colors into the 12 well palette, I had the remnants, the remainder colors in the smaller one. These are the colors I do use kind of regularly, but maybe not quite so often. So the cool thing about that little palette is it's going to encourage me to be a little more experimental when I go out and paint. While I was painting and recording these videos over the last couple weeks, I couldn't help but think a lot about the supplies that we use, what we choose, and if it says anything about us, about our personalities. I am not a perfectionist when it comes to most things. I'm fine with a bit of mess, and I don't mind if I spill paint on my desk and it's there for a while. But I know artists who have to have a super clean, very organized space in order to feel creative, and that's completely fine for them. But I had to laugh a little at myself because I am never more of a perfectionist than when I get a new palette. And it's that perfectly clean material. There are no stains or dried paint or muddy colors or anything. It's all just so nice and clean. And I find I change the way I approach my art and my setup and my space when it's that perfect. And I don't think that it benefits me to be in that mindset. I thrive when I'm experimenting and when I'm very playful, and that just naturally leads to a bit more of a mess. So I'm dripping paint everywhere, I'm maybe splashing a little, I'm mixing colors, I'm getting my palettes all dirty and muddy. That is where I thrive, and I've kind of embraced that over the years. So when I set up a new palette, I really struggle at first, I think. And it's really not until a few paintings in that I start to feel like myself again. And once I've got it a little bit messed up, I know that things are going to be okay and I'm going to enjoy using it. And speaking of which, it's autumn right now. It's my favorite time of year. I am so excited to go out and paint, and I couldn't help but crack open a new sketchbook. And I opened the page, the first page. It's that big, scary blank page that we always face when we get a new sketchbook. Without even meaning to, I dripped paint on it. And that got me started painting this wild, crazy autumn tree. And I had so much fun after that point. Whereas when I was looking at the blank page, I was just like, oh my gosh, what am I going to paint in here? I don't want to mess up the first page, just like I always do. Okay, so I think I'm rambling at this point, but I think it's just interesting to me to compare my headspace of getting new supplies and the first blank page of a sketchbook, my approach as an artist. I guess I just like to embrace the mess and go with the flow a little bit more. Okay, as I wrap up this video, I'm realizing there's so much I could talk about in regards to these palettes and this type of painting, but I think I will start collecting more questions and save that for a future video. Okay, so what do you think? Would this kind of palette be good for you, or do you think it's just a bit too much maintenance, too much work? Let me know your thoughts. I'm curious. Do you prefer palettes? Do you prefer dried gouache palettes? Do you prefer to pour it out on a tray from the tube? I'm always curious to know what the majority of you guys are thinking and doing. I will say that one of the huge benefits of this one is that it fits a little bit better on my pochade box when I'm outside. This one does fit, but takes up more space, obviously. And again, I am having a little trouble encouraging myself to use it outside because I am just so paranoid that I'm going to drop it again. I know I'll eventually get over that. No matter what you decide to use, the whole point is to find ways to make it easier, to just do it more. Make the process of setting up and breaking down your space as easy as you can, because that is what encourages you to paint more often. Find ways to, okay, no. Okay, okay. That's my cue, I think. Oh gosh, okay. Let's go for a little walk, shall we? Thank you all for hanging out with me today, and I will see you again next time. Take care. Yeah.